Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. I got an email from Bruce Lloyd. Subject line: Glenn Pace talks about church history sites, 1986. And in the email, Jared, I don't know if you have ever heard of this Glenn Pace talk from 1986. You'll want to put this in your spreadsheet and maybe podcast. It's a classic. Hopefully this email won't end up in your spam and you'll and you'll see it sooner than later because you have several thousand unread emails. There's a small snippet. Yeah, so we're going to look at this, and thank you, Bruce, for sending me this email. This did lead to a quote that I needed that has to do with Adam-ondi-Ahman, which in turn, as I was doing the research for this video, led me to another quote about Adam-ondi-Ahman. I've said before, I don't know how much else is out there. There have been times where I've thought, okay, I've collected everything that there is that's been said by early church members and presidents of the church and so on about Adam-ondi-Ahman, but I'm feeling less and less confident about that, and I'm so happy with each new one that comes in. And I've been able to fill out a little bit more of my spreadsheet for the history of Missouri. In fact, I came across what I think is a pretty important event that I didn't know about that I think helped lead to the church returning to Missouri. So we got a lot to talk about. We'll start with this talk that Bruce recommended. This is a BYU devotional. The name of the talk is The Elusive Balance, March 25th, 1986. And at this time, according to his Wikipedia article, he was second counselor in the presiding bishopric. This is a classic. I definitely agree. I don't think I ever heard of this talk before, but it is the stuff that classic talks are made of. Okay, this section is called "Ye Were Past Feeling." Next, let's see what we can learn about balance from the recent fuss about historical documents. I'm not sure what he's referring to. If you know, let me know in the comments. It probably had something to do with like a forgery. I know that there's at least been one or two famous forgeries of historical documents. Okay, continuing. The lessons on straying off center are vivid. Let me ask you a soul-searching question. With the discovery of any document, no matter how contradictory to what you believe to be true, shake your testimony? I like that this is coming up right now because recently I've been wondering about AI. I feel like we need to be cautious with AI, but I have wondered if, you know, through the process of time, if there's like some big discovery or something that AI discovers that would shake people's testimonies, whether it's about our church or Christianity or the nature of God or something like that. So let's think about that. What if something happens with science, technology, AI that would seem to contradict what we know to be true? Right, continuing. It may raise some intellectual questions, but if it shakes your testimony, I would submit you don't really have one. Yikes. You know, when I started this channel about 5 years ago, we're almost at 5 years now, I've come to realize that there's much more diversity within the church than what I previously realized because you typically, unless you're doing something like this, you probably just associate mostly with your ward, your stake, and you meet people throughout your life. But when you're doing something like this, where you're getting thousands of emails and even more comments, you start to see the varying degrees of understanding, testimony, beliefs within the church. And I've been concerned at times about Like how sometimes people get really excited at certain YouTube videos. Not so much okay, let me like content that helps to prove that the Book of Mormon is true or prove different points of church history, which I think it's great. I think it's good that we have scholarship. I think it's great that we have podcasters that dig into things. But I worry about this. Are you getting excited because you don't really have a testimony and you feel like you have hard evidence that the church is true? And I think that's a problem. I think that we have to have the real thing. We need to obtain a witness from the Spirit, and everything is based on that. All right, continuing. The intellectuals of our day may point at those who cannot and will not be shaken and accuse them of quote unquote blind faith. This type of accusation only serves as an indictment to those intellectual giants and proves them to be spiritual pygmies. They have not yet learned there is an avenue to truth greater than intellect and more certain than the five senses. They have left unexplored the most glorious of all avenues to truth, direct revelation from heaven. Don't worry, we're getting to Adam-ondi-Ahman in just a minute. Does all this mean we should have no interest in history? I love church history. I'm thankful we know the locations of the Sacred Grove, Hill Cumorah, the Jackson County Temple site, Nauvoo, Adam-ondi-Ahman, Liberty Jail, and the other sites. My joy when visiting these sites is intensified by knowing the history behind them. Yeah, you guys, we should try and learn church history. If you're going, and I know a lot of people do this anyway, but if you're going to a church history site, try and learn about it ahead of time. You can still feel the spirit there. But if you know what happened there before, or if you know its prophetic future, it does heighten the experience. Continuing. However, the most lasting impressions obtained by these visits is what is felt there, rather than what is remembered. This is true. I have a testimony of that. I'm actually going to skip down. So they went to Missouri. The next day, we strayed off center. We went to Adam-ondi-Ahman, part of a sacred past and destined to be included in a sacred future. Knowing this history helped us understand the significance of the land. We had a history book that told of an altar of Adam and of the Nephites. All right. This is important because with historic sites, I've noticed there tends to be debates and little points of history that people argue about. And I try my best just to stick to what has actually been said about those sites. As far as like if the Adam's altar site, whether that was also a Nephite altar, I don't think that science is ever going to deliver that answer to us. We rely on the words of prophets. And if we go to my spreadsheet called Quotes A through Z, row 16 is for Adam-ondi-Ahman altars. And I think the only other, the first place where we hear this idea that this was also a Nephite altar, it seemed, from what I gather, it seems like the site has been repurposed for various things. First, it was Adam's altar. Later on, it seems maybe the Nephites used it as an altar. For all we know, maybe the Jaredites were there. And then more recently, it seems like it's a burial mound as well. I think all those things can be true at the same time. But the first place that I know of that we get this idea, you can find this in the Joe Smith Papers website. This is Journal, March through September 1838. And this comes from Elder George W. Robinson of the 70. General Church Recorder and Clerk to the First Presidency. And he says, Lyman Whites, who lives at the foot of Tower Hill, a name appropriated by President Smith in consequence of the remains of an old Nephitish altar and tower. Let's look at the map. I have my Google Earth map. The link for this is in the description box below. You can use this as a guide when you come to Missouri or Iowa, Kansas. You can look at what I have here. So here's Adam-ondi-Ahman. Right here's where you park. And then there's this little trail that you go down. And the first thing that you come across is the site of Adam's altar. Let me just pull this up. So this is what it looks like. There's this concrete block that marks the site of Adam's altar. And just down the hill from here, this goes downhill as you continue down the path, you get to Lyman White's second cabin site. Okay. So this is where we're talking about as we read this. So Elder George W. Robinson talking about Lyman White's at the foot of Tower Hill, which was called Tower Hill by Joseph Smith, according to Elder Robinson, because of the remains of an old Nephitish altar, which in other quotes that I have, he also says that it's Adam's altar of sacrifice. Okay, back to this. I'll show you the other quote that I just came across about Adam-ondi-Ahman, but let's finish this first. So we had a history book that told of an altar of Adam and of the Nephites. This book told the exact location. We didn't know at the time that subsequent research had given rise to some questions on the exact location. We arrived 1 hour before sunset in search of the precise location of the altar. We drove to and fro, becoming more frustrated by the minute. So this is back in 1986. I don't know. It seems like they've settled on this location that I just showed you. Everything seems to point to that. If you have any research that says, no, this is not it, then please send it my way. I haven't come across that so far. Across everything that I have, it seems like that is where it was. Because, okay, anyway, I'll show you some more stuff in a little bit. Okay, continuing, we climbed over fences, walked through fields. I'm sure they had permission to do this. Stampeded cattle, and soon found ourselves in a very vile mood. Fortunately, we came to our senses and drove to a knoll just in time to watch the sunset and enjoy the spirit of the place. Again, the Lord blessed us with a spiritual experience that can be recalled vividly upon reflection. How often do we get so involved in the search for historical and archaeological details that we fail to take advantage of spiritual experiences right before our eyes? The same historical knowledge that can intensify spiritual experiences can destroy spirituality when we stray too far off center. And that's true. There are very rich spiritual experiences to be had at these sacred sites. Spiritual feelings, impressions, and miracles as well. I've seen it myself. So these are spiritual places, and ultimately it all goes it all goes back to Jesus Christ, because he's the purpose for all these different places and why they're special. It's all related to his church and his gospel. But continuing, a complete testimony. So he's saying this in the context of, if you don't really have a testimony and you're looking for evidence. So I don't know that that's what he was doing. It seems like maybe he already did have a testimony, but like, if you're like, is this really Adam-ondi-Ahman? Where's the altar? I need to find the altar. You shouldn't be trying to gain knowledge that way when it comes to spiritual things. A complete testimony was never intended to be gained through history, except through that kept by prophets and coming forth of Scripture. A saving testimony will never come from a spectacular historical or archaeological find. If the Lord meant for our testimonies to be based on physical, historical evidence rather other than Scripture, he would send Moroni with the gold plates. We would then send them to the FBI, and experts on golden plates would give them scientific tests. What would be the verdict? Opinions would vary. Yeah, you think about the Book of Mormon, um, when Nephi and his brothers were trying to get the brass plates. They had an encounter with an angel, and that didn't do much for Laman and Lemuel. It didn't change their beliefs, it seems. It didn't help them live righteously. So I don't think it would really matter. So I would really ask yourself that if you get really excited about proof about the Book of Mormon, proof about, I see a lot of like content about the temple and how it's like a lot of things in there are rooted in ancient traditions and such. And again, I'm not saying that it's wrong to do that, but if you're getting really excited about it, you might want to ask yourself, why is that? Do you actually have a testimony? Later on, he says this. Um, you know what? Let's finish with that. But I'm gonna skip down to this. So he's talking about your success ratio of receiving revelation, spiritual truth. If your success ratio for recognizing the Spirit is low, ask yourself these questions. This is really good. This applies not only to having a testimony, I think it also applies to seeing signs, whether it's personal signs, like you're seeing signs in your own life giving you guidance as to what to do, what path to go down, or signs of the times, the second coming. If you don't see it, if you watch my channel or other people's channels and you think that it's all just silly, you should ask yourself these questions. Number one, how well am I living the commandments? Number two, am I studying the scriptures in order that I might be more attuned to spiritual things? Number three, am I praying with real intent? Number four, have I done my homework and gone to the Lord with a well thought out solution? That's important. Do you just expect everything just come to you without you doing any work? Because the Lord wants us to work through our problems. We're not things to be acted upon. We're things that, well, hopefully we're things that act, and we're not things that are acted upon. And that's the attitude of a thing that is acted upon. If you just expect that everything's going to come to you, all you have to do is pray, and then everything will open up. We have to put forth the effort and be a partner with the Lord. Number five, have I learned to recognize a stupor of thought? That comes from Doctrine and Covenants. I'm not going to get into that, but hopefully you recognize that scripture. Have you learned to recognize a stupor of thought? And then number six, can I honestly say, thy will be done? And am I willing to take no for an answer? Yeah, that's because if you pray and then maybe you have a stupor of thought, you feel that something's not right, but you really want it, you really want that to be the outcome, um, then you may override that no that the Lord gives you. All right. By the way, I just want to bring this up again. The church does virtual tours of these historic sites. Some of these are pre-recorded, but for me, even more exciting is they have a bunch that are live, where you do like a video call and you can speak to the missionaries. So I would highly encourage you to do this. Here's Carthage Jail. You just click on this, and I promise you this will be a powerful experience. Click on book, and look, they had it in Spanish. I don't know if you saw that. but there's Spanish down here. Click on book, and then the next one that they're going to do is on the 29th. It looks like they have 2 that day, and then the 30th, and then also the 31st. And then pretty much every single day next month, except for the 2nd for some reason. Aren't they doing one on the 2nd? I don't know. Anyway, make sure to do that. Okay. Now, as I was doing the research for this video, I went to The Refiner's Fire by President Alvin R. Dyer. He was a member of the first presidency. After all the work that he did with the Missouri lands, he had to write a book to let us know what's going on, and to talk about the past, but also to talk about the future. This is a very good book to read if you're interested in Missouri. And this led me to an autobiography that I didn't know about. Unfortunately, all we have that's free is this text version on archive.org. Autobiography of Andrew Jenson. Now, this was an exciting find for me because not only did we get a new quote about Adam-ondi-Ahman, but I was able to fill in a new piece to this Missouri puzzle. This is my spreadsheet called Timeline Church in Missouri. I started it with the intention of figuring out what has been like the hidden history of the church returning to Missouri. I'm sure other people have written books about it, or they have a partial picture, but I want to know the whole thing. If you'll recall, if we go back in time, the church was driven out of Missouri effectively in 1838. Okay. 5 years before that, we were driven out of Jackson County, including my own ancestor, Levi Jackman. But 1838, that's when the extermination order came. And so the question is, when did the church start to come back? Because as you can see, now we have the Kansas City, Missouri temple. We have an Independence stake, Liberty stake. There's a bunch of stakes around here. So when did that happen? I have this color coded. If it's in blue, then it means that that's an event that has to do with our church. If it's green, then that has to do with the RLDS, or as they're now known, Community of Christ. In column F, I have a column so we can see who the prophet president was of their church at the time. I'm going to do the same thing for our church like I've done on other spreadsheets. I just haven't gotten to that yet. Okay, so this is what happened. We started to see some activity in the late 1800s. The RLDS created their first branch in Independence in 1873. In 1881, they moved church headquarters from Illinois to Lamoni, Iowa, which is just on the border with Missouri. The next year, Church of Christ Temple Lot took possession of the Temple Lot. They were the first group to return and be able to do that. I don't know why the RLDS didn't. I still have to research that. And then this is where we get to this new piece of information. You see this big block right here? All these new entries. This is what we're talking about in this video. Earlier that year, Joseph Smith III laid the cornerstone for the stone church, which is this right here. This is a cross from the temple lot. I still haven't been inside it, but it's an amazing looking church. It has a chime that goes off during the day at certain times. I still haven't figured out when the chime goes off, but you have a chime that plays from there. And then later that year, there was a special mission. So we have Elder Andrew Jenson. He was a 70. And I guess, I don't think he was the church historian, but he worked with like the church history department of that day. And he was called to go on a mission to Missouri And later on, from what I could tell, it seemed like he went on to New York, but it was basically a church history mission of investigation. And, and when I read it, it seems like he was paying attention to the cost of land. So I don't know if this was multiple things in one. It's like, we need to get more about church history. We need to start thinking about Missouri again. And we need to also think about land prices because maybe the church is going to start coming back. And what happened was it did. So this was 1888. 5 years later, the Salt Lake Temple was dedicated. And less than 6 months after the dedication of the Salt Lake Temple, President Wilford Woodruff, President George Q. Cannon, and President Joseph F. Smith and the Tabernacle Choir and Orson F. Whitney came to Independence on their way to the Chicago World Fair, which I don't think is coincidence. The same year that the Salt Lake Temple was dedicated, they happened to come through Independence, which will someday be one of the two world headquarters of the world. And then the next year, Wilford Woodruff got a letter from Jerome E. Page, who is the son of an excommunicated apostle named John E. Page, asking him to start coming back to Missouri. And then 2 years after that, there was a special mission sent to this area, to the Kansas City and Independence area. It was a musical mission, but it was like a unprecedented special mission that they sent here. And then in 1897, we had the first branch organized in Independence with Richard Preeter as branch president. And this is the first branch of our church back in Independence since the expulsion in 1833. And then there was more stuff here, but there was a lot of activity, and it seems to maybe have started with this special mission of Andrew Jenson. So what he did, it was him and others. We have Edward Stevenson, Joseph S. Black. They came to Missouri first. They arrived in Kansas City. They stayed 3 days in Independence and had a lot of contact with Church of Christ Temple Lot. And then they went to Richmond, and then Crooked River, and then Far West, Hans Mill and Gallatin, and then Adam-ondi-Ahman. And the last place they went was Liberty Jail. So we're going to look at what happened when they went to Adam-ondi-Ahman. I've added this to quotes A through Z. This row for the altars at Adam-ondi-Ahman. Okay, here it is. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but we'll just go here. Okay. After reaching the heights on the north, we passed through a beautiful grove of timber and finally reached Sarah A. McDonald's farmhouse, located on the old site of Adam-ondi-Ahman. This is, in fact, Lyman White's old house. So again, we already talked about this. Lyman White's second cabin. His first cabin is actually over here. They have a marker for it right here. But okay, so they're over here. Okay. Somewhat renovated, but the same logs and part of the roof are still there. It is the only house on the old town site which has changed in appearance during the past 50 years because of the heavy growth of timber on what was formerly open prairie land. Nearly the entire length of the heights from the old Adam-ondi-Ahman Hill eastward is a dense forest. We walked up the hill. So here's the part that we're gonna focus on. We walked up the hill and soon found the remnants of an ancient altar on the top of what is supposed to be the highest point in the neighborhood. The McDonald's thought the top of the knoll was about 100 feet above Grand River. So they're talking about the the altar site, or Adam's altar of prayer, this site right here. Remember how this is like from here to Lyman White's, it's downhill? Well, he said that they walked uphill a short distance to a knoll, and I have pictures of that. So here we are at Adam-ondi-Ahman, and there's this knoll right here that you come to. There's a historical marker in front of it. It doesn't mention the fact that this is the Adam's altar site, but this is that knoll, and all you have is just this little um, concrete block right here, and this area overlooks the valley. My understanding is that this was somewhat recently cleared within the last few years, maybe within the last 5 or 10 years. Okay, so going back to this. So went up there. So here's a new quote that we have talking about an altar. And then later on, now, according to President Alvin R. Dyer's book, Refiner's Fire, he interprets this part as having reference to the altar of sacrifice. So let's read this first, and then I'll show you what I mean. The mound or ruins of the ancient altar on the top of the Adam-ondi-Ahman Hill, which he may be referring to Spring Hill. There's the two areas. You have Tower Hill, and then there's Spring Hill. On the top of the Adam-ondi-Ahman Hill measures 36 feet in diameter. A large number of rock fragments, which no doubt were once part of the altar, lie scattered all about. Now, to me, I'm not sure why Alvin R. Dyer interpreted it that way, because he goes on to talk about the mound, which seems to be talking about the knoll that we were just talking about. But whatever the case, Alvin R. Dyer believes that he's talking about the altar of sacrifice. So this is the altar of prayer over here on this side. And then if you go down the path and turn right at Preacher's Rock and go over here and don't go down the service road and then come up this way, this will take you up to where the city was being built. You have all these different buildings right here. Public building number 1, public building number 2. Well, sorry. Does that say, it doesn't say number 2. It just says public building. And then does this one say number 1? Yeah, public building number 1. Okay, whatever. So this must be number 1. That's number 2. You have a blacksmith shop, McGee's tailor shop. And it seems like the consensus is that this right here would be the temple site, in that the altar of sacrifice was near the temple site. So we're looking at, well, let's just look at this right here. So you got marker number 10, public square and religious site. And then on the back of it, you have Fwert Brickyard from the Cravensville period. I have a quote from Alvin R. Dyer that I want to share with you. This is from a BYU devotional, 1967. And sorry, I gotta find the spot here. Okay. Our automobile rested in the large valley of Adam-ondi-Ahman at the base of Spring Hill, and we could clearly see Spring Hill, on the bluff of which a temple site has been dedicated, and where the altar of Adam once stood, which was used for sacrifice. The other altar on Tower Hill, which is also nearby, was usually used for prayer. And according to the prophet Joseph Smith, this is the altar where Adam gathered his children at eventide, which I wish I could track down that quote. But the altar of sacrifice, wherein the angel of the Lord appeared unto Adam and asked him why he offered sacrifice, and he said, I know not, save the Lord hath commanded me. And that altar is on the place we call Spring Hill, near the temple site. So that's this area right here. So it's interesting. when we read that scripture, when we're in the temple and we think about Adam and Eve, it's here, or at least in this area somewhere. But it seems like the consensus is here, because let me read the rest of what he says. I stood on that bluff not many months ago on the very place where the storehouse had been erected. And there is still discernible, the broken red brick of the storehouse. And the storehouse was very close to the temple site. And the altar of sacrifice was not many yards from this sacred place. So like I said, on the back of this, you have marker number 10, but then if you go to the back side, you have marker number 12, Fuert Brickyard, Cravensville, period. Now that's talking about a brickyard, but I don't know if that has anything to do with the storehouse. When you look at these other places, again, I don't know what public building number 1 was supposed to be, or public building number 2, but it is pretty clear that this area is where the city was being built. So if there was a storehouse, I would think that it would be over here, but I don't know. Another proposed location of the temple is up here, where you have Spring Hill Summit, because this is like, by definition, this is the highest part of Spring Hill. So I don't know. I tend to think, just based on what we've read, I really tend to think that it was over here. But again, it doesn't really matter. Our testimony should not be based on this. But I feel like when you come here anyway, regardless, you can definitely feel the Spirit. And that should be the primary thing when you come here. But this place does have a future. At some point, there will be a temple here. And at that point, I guess we'll know for sure where the temple is supposed to be. But the altar of sacrifice was somewhere around here. I want to read maybe just a few more things. We got this from President David O. McKay. This is in the David O. McKay diary excerpts on the University of Virginia's website for Mormon studies. And I just want to read this. So this is when him and Alvin R. Dyer and Joseph Fielding Smith and others came to Missouri. They came to Tower Hill. And then it says, the party stopped here, and President McKay, President Smith, and the rest of us got out of the cars and stood close to the spot of the ruins of the old Nephite and Adamic altar of prayer. Elder Dyer narrated some of the events of historic significance that transpired at this place, which concerned the many visits of the prophet Joseph Smith and of his designating the altars and how they were used by the ancients. Elder Dyer identified the 2 pieces of property totaling 140 acres that options to buy had been obtained from dustmen by the church. The one piece contained the bluff area of Spring Hill, where once many of the homes at Adam-ondi-Ahman were erected, including also the ruins of the storehouse located in the center block in this old city. Well, there you go. In the center block. So let's go ahead and highlight that. Let's do the ruins of the storehouse. The ruins of the storehouse located in the center block in this old city, together with the temple site and the altar site where sacrifice was offered by Adam. Okay, yeah. You guys, I am pretty sure. This right here, this marker says public square. This is the public square up here. So the storehouse must have been in this area. Okay, let's go back here. I think that's all. Well, let's just read this bottom part. It was clearly seen at this point how the historic area of Spring Hill of Adam-ondi-Ahman had been preserved by inundation by the relocation of the dam site. Uh, at this time, they were thinking of the city of Pattonsville, I think, was thinking of constructing a dam in a certain location. And if they had done it, it would have flooded the valley of Adam-ondi-Ahman, which would have been a catastrophe, obviously. Continuing, the high point of Spring Hill was pointed out to the president. It is upon this high part of the bluff where the temple site was dedicated, and near to this is the site of the altar of Adam. Okay. Actually, I think we're going to go ahead and end it here. I knew I was preparing a lot of stuff, and I always think that I can get through it in a timely manner. But if you want to read the rest of what I have, the link to my spreadsheets is in the description box of each video. Again, this spreadsheet is called Quotes A through Z. You just click on the 3 bars at the bottom left and then navigate to Quotes A through Z. And this is row 16. I'll put the links for all these other things that we've been looking at in the description box, as well as this talk that we started off with by Glenn L. Pace. All right, that's going to be for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.